Hello, all. This is Dr. Barbara Stroud, and I'm launching a new series, Professional Conversations with Friends. And today I am so excited and so honored to share with you a brilliant professional and colleague and friend, Dr. Chandra Ghosh Ippen, who has many credentials which are on this list. I don't want to read it all to you. Clearly related with the Child-Parent Psychotherapy community, a member of the 0 to 3 board, has written several books, some of which we're going to talk about and celebrate today, is well known for her work in Child-Parent Psychotherapy, if you're not sure what CPP means, is well known for her children's books, which we're going to talk about a little bit, and for her commitment to culturally sensitive and respectful care. And when you have time to read her bio, you'll notice she has a fascination with pies. And I don't mean 3.14. So she does have a new book. And Chandra, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about this while the slide is up, and then we'll move to our time in discussion.
Sure, and if it's okay, what I wanted to say is that we began this series after Hurricane Katrina. I was talking with my colleague Mindy Cronenberg, who was in Louisiana, and we realized that there were many families in need and not enough services. And we also realized that so many parents were just very capable of wanting to do things with their kids by themselves. And so we developed a free disaster series with versions for hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, and then fires. And then very recently, we really wanted to adapt it and to think about COVID. And again, giving families the tools and the skills so that you could have the dialogues that you wanted to have with your children. And so it's completely tailorable, it's completely free. It's in English and Spanish, and it will soon be in Chinese. And it has different parts. So in the story, you have a couple of little mice, Trinket and Sam, whose communities are affected by coronavirus, by COVID. And really the questions, the book was meant to help us to think about the little children. If you think it's funny that the mice have big ears, but the little children, they're always listening. And they're always watching, and they're seeing the changes in their community. And so we often aren't thinking about them and how this affects them, but the book is really meant to shine a spotlight on the needs of little kids and also on the importance of families, because that's where the dialogue happens. Dialogues about fears and worries, and dialogues about good things that we're doing within our home, within our communities, as well as emotional stressors. So we think of this very much as kind of a way that we can have mental health in homes without kind of necessarily as a first pass going to see a provider. So we hope that it helps families. There's different parts. There's a parent guide that you can read. There are a series of questions. So they're called Trinket and Sam's questions, where you can look through them and think, what might my kid ask? And then you can pick those sheets that you like. And then there's the book, which is a coloring book. And I kind of love that little kids, they'll like scribble all over a page, or they'll bring you back to a page, or they'll choose page by page what they do. So we hope that it's useful to people.
Thank you so much for that narrative. I'm going to let everyone see us now. Yay. And you've spent a lot of time thinking about and working in the community of children that have experienced trauma. And trauma-informed lens is getting a lot of play these days. Everybody's trauma-informed. And I want to hear from you, for some of our audience that might not know what that means, to think about this idea of a trauma-informed lens and how we best support young children, right, in a trauma experience, and particularly COVID.
Yeah, so I think if we swap out the word trauma for danger, and we think about danger and safety, right? I think we can all get behind the fact that when you're in danger, your body and your brain, you have a very specific type of learning. It's kind of like single shot, very powerful learning. And it's actually interesting when I say the word learning, because learning often implies head. And it's really more about body. It takes you kind of viscerally back to like the way that we're created as creatures, right? And we think about how our bodies are designed to keep us alive as individuals, as a species, and to keep our young alive. And so when there's danger, what's the best way to survive, right? And then you think about how some of the best ways, these are pretty common patterns, but like the fight pattern, but it's just more like, you can also see it as like irritability, stuff going on in your body, kind of the freezing pattern, which, we often don't talk about, but where you actually have an out of body experience and you're not so present. There's the flight, running away, but that can actually also be like, I'm just super active. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because like there's this thing that's dangerous and I just need to get out of here. And so that goes into movement. Right? And then you think about layer on COVID and the fact that in order to keep our communities safe and our health systems not being overwhelmed, that we're being asked to stay in place. And stay in place doesn't mean stay still, but it's interesting for some of us where it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to move. And that's kind of a recipe for disaster, that you've got these chemicals in your body that are designed to make you move. And you've got this message of I shouldn't go outside and be active. And so then all those chemicals are in your body. And so I think what a trauma-informed response teaches us is that when there's danger, your body goes through a very normal response to danger, which is really designed to keep us safe. And so one of the things that we would be thinking about, really interesting, and I know that both you and I like to think about this, but is diversity and differences, right? And I want to think about my relationship to danger is not the same as somebody else's relationship to danger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I want to just step for
Yeah.
just a minute before we go into that, because I think it's really important that we both have a great connection to and support of cultural differences and community culture and really being sensitive to their experience. You mentioned how danger can present in children differently, right?
Yep.
We can want to move, or we can really shut down or turn inward and maybe even be shy and quiet. And perhaps if the teacher asks a question we don't answer, perhaps we can fight, be aggressive with that. And it moves me to the concept of challenging behaviors that we hear in early caring education and preschool and even kindergarten classrooms or school age kids. And when we think of it from this danger perspective, I think we can reimagine those behaviors. I want to think a little bit about that. And then, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that fundamentally, so in the treatment model that we do called Child-Parent Psychotherapy, we have this thing that we call the CPP triangle. And basically what you would say is on the right-hand side are all of those challenging behaviors that you're bringing up. And I think about how they sometimes bring us down. You're just like, oh, the weight of those behaviors when you're a parent or when you're a childcare provider with all those kids in the room. Yeah. But the left-hand side is really the pathway of how did you get here? Right? Like what led you here? And it's really hard when you're stressed to be curious, right? And one of the things we think about is, okay, so is it reasonable, like when we think about a kid who can't pay attention, that when you're super stressed and you're worried and you've got like free floating anxiety because the people in your home are stressed and you may or may not understand why, and they're stressed for really good reasons because of finances and jobs. And then you're carrying all that in. I think of like little kids as like little volcanoes, right? Like they've got little volcanoes in their bellies. They're not volcanoes, but sometimes they're really good at they're really good at reading us. And so we think about how they're actually wired with these mirror neurons. It's like they've got like little antenna and receptors. And so they're like looking at us and they're like, oh, stress. And then they carry that in their bodies. And then how does it come out? It comes out with those things that we call behaviors. And if we think of them as they're kind of your signs of stress, this is a very weird segue, but I think about poker.
Okay.
And very, very weird, right? Totally weird. Okay. So like when you're playing poker, right, you want to be able to read the person opposite you, right? And that's their tell, right? You're like, oh, good hand. That's what do they do? Like they go like this when they've got a good hand. So you're reading them. And I think about how as parents, we're reading, or as, childcare providers, we're reading the child opposite us. And we're not saying what's the tell that you've got a good hand. We're saying what's the tell that you're anxious, right? And if we just say, oh, this kid's not paying attention, we're missing the kind of what are they telling us, right? So how do we read you?
Yeah, I just want to follow up with one more thought about this. I often hear people say, well, little babies, they're not really understanding, 2 and 3 months. And I want to hear what you would say to that feedback.
Oh, well, I would say we wish that. right? We totally wish that. And I have a few weird ways of answering this, because if you could tell, I just think sometimes in some weird ways. But one is we know that, the way that they learn is through serve and return. And lots of people have talked about that, but they're constantly looking at us and we're looking back at them. And so they actually spend quite a bit of time looking at our faces, maybe more time than we spend looking at each other's faces. And so if you would imagine that I'm stressed, and when I'm stressed, I go, a grown-up might not notice. What if a kid does? Or if you think about one thing that they're really good at, even as they're learning languages, is they're really good at vocal tone. And so you think about, like, when I'm stressed and I'm saying things like, I'm not stressed. The kids are always like, oh, yes, you are.
Yeah.
Because they read us, like, it's almost like we lose the skill to do that. So I just want to bring that down to babies, because I think that babies are we know that babies are very sensitive to vocal tone and to voices and to body language, and they're very attuned to their caregivers. And then I promised you a very weird explanation. So my very weird explanation is that, I've had pets, I've had dogs and cats. And what I want to say is that most of us who've had them have had moments when they have indicated to us that they don't like how stressed we are. Like if we're arguing or something. Have you ever had that, like you're having a moment with a roommate or somebody you live with, and you notice that they're really kind of in, like, oh my goodness, they're affected by that, right? Or when you're not around, they act out. And I want to put that out there, because I know it's a very weird way, and I'm not equating children to animals in any way.
No. Yeah.
But culturally, I think many of us believe that animals are affected and that animals will remember. But we tell ourselves that babies don't.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Yeah. I love thank you. I love the metaphor of the triangle, and sort of, or the image of the triangle, and helping parents as well as providers or folks who can find young children overwhelming because they may not be in their presence all the time. I mean, now families are in the presence of their children all the time, and it's lovely to get the break from childcare or school. Is this tell versus, here's a behavior I don't like. Let's try to understand or examine what the child is communicating, telling us through that behavior, albeit I don't like that behavior, and perhaps that behavior increases my anxiety and stress. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to give you a couple of examples just in case it's helpful.
Yeah.
I remember a little boy, and he had been in a car accident. And this is a very simple kind of trauma. Simple, that's not a good way to put it, but we would say that it's something that happened and it ended. And yet for him, it would be really reasonable to understand that he was really trying to understand what happened. And he was what we call reenacting it. He was taking toy cars and smashing it. Well, when he was in pre-K and another kid took his car away from him, he got really upset.
Yes.
And I just want to say, from an outsider's perspective, and I really feel for the grown-ups caring for him, it was about sharing. And for him, it was really about something else. And that's just one of the numerous examples of how we view things as grown-ups. And if we don't know the kid's left side, right, we can really be kind of missing what they're telling us. Right, which is sometimes bad things happen with cars, and I need to show you. And we might say, so if the parents had sort of lovingly passed that along, or if I, was the parent, I'd be able to say the car went boom. It was really scary, and now you're okay. Right, and that's a very different message. And we might even say, you really needed that car. You wanted to hold it. You didn't want someone to take it away, right? So I think this idea of the behavior and connecting it is so important.
And that's something I would agree that, parents can use right now. You can start thinking about the things you're noticing in your children and what they're trying to communicate in this moment, that really strong feelings are happening for all of us. And one of the challenges of childhood is how do we tell you what we're feeling? We show you with our behavior oftentimes. And as parents, caregivers, people who love children, how do we support kids in communicating these really big, overwhelming feelings sometimes that they just don't even have the words for. Thank
Totally.
you. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's so confusing, you kind of alluded to it before, is that if we go back to the idea of the poker tell, you know how like some people, they brush hair off their faces and other people, they rub their noses. And so we all have different ways of showing things. And so you were describing kind of how some kids, it might come out in their behavior where they're actually doing things like, you know, hitting people or whatnot. Other kids, they're really retreating.
Yes.
And I would say that, you know, I kind of like to use animals as metaphors, like they're turtling up, right? So they're kind of withdrawing. You can see the kids who turtle. Some kids, they really it goes into their body and they just need to move. And I think of them as like little rabbits. And they just like need to run, rabbits who just need to run all over the place. So I think where this is confusing is if we all had one stress response pattern, it would be so much easier for parents because you would say, I recognize this. But the fact that we all have these unique ways, even within families, you know, different siblings can react in different ways. Yeah.
I think too, as you sort of talk about our different stress response patterns, look at this, you know, how many of us really think about our own stress response pattern? Probably not on the daily. And yet here we are in this very intense moment of stress where it might be coming out very quickly and we may not even realize what we're communicating. So here's another opportunity as an individual, whether you're a parent or single or what have you, to kind of say, hey, maybe I can look in the mirror and get a sense of what is my stress response so that I can start to notice and even prepare those around me. You know, hey, if I raise my voice or if I just close the door and want to be alone, that's me saying I've had enough and I'm overwhelmed. And I just think in terms of us as adults communicating to each other and to our children, what a wonderful model, you know, about, yeah, we all get stressed and we can manage it. It doesn't have to manage us. And some self-awareness can come out of this as well.
That's beautiful. I also loved how you really paired it to what do we need? So how do we show it? How do we show up when we're stressed? And then how do we actually say, this is what I need right now?
Yeah. And we know, brilliant, because we also know that kids, as you said, kids are learning from us. So if they're learning that we're stressed and overwhelmed, they're also learning that we're going to show you how we manage feeling stressed and overwhelmed so that you can build the capacity. This is why I love these conversations. We just learn so much from each other. It's so fun. So we kind of have talked. I had this idea about how we can best support caregivers, and I think we've done a little bit of that. I am going to plug another book because I adore it so much. Once I was very, very scared, and it's just delightful. And when you talked about, no one can see my mouth, when you talked about the animal metaphor, it's really described very nicely in this book. And then the other thing that I love is you have a really lovely webinar that will walk folks through kind of what the book is communicating, the different patterns from the different animals. And it's a great way for parents to begin to understand stress responses in their kids and themselves. Clinicians can use it, educators can use it. So I was going to speak to that and also ask you, what else can we sort of suggest to parents? Because I know a lot of parents are feeling very overwhelmed.
So I think one thing I wanted to share with folks is really the ABCs of a trauma-informed approach, right? So the A we've been doing. So the A is acknowledge. And so, and to some degree, accept, which it sounds very counterintuitive because we're always like, how do we fix this, right? And I'm like, okay, I mean, the classic phrase is, it is what it is, right? And so how can you sort of say, right now we're all under stress. And so like you said, so sometimes my voice might get raised. Sometimes I might turtle up. Sometimes I might need to move and run around like a tornado. Sometimes I might stress eat. Like, I have to tell you that I have a container of chocolate fudge brownie, right? Because like, that is one of my things. And I'm like, okay, actually, I'm really loving Rocky Road right now. It's the little pillowy goodness and the marshmallows, right?
Yeah, we're making a lot of banana bread in my house. But anyway, yeah.
But I just want to say that, you know, you sort of accept that I'm under stress. And so you acknowledge it, and you acknowledge that your kids are under stress, and that you acknowledge that things aren't perfect. And so I wanted just to start with, really, we're not supposed to be perfect. We are stressed. We may be showing up as our less than ideal parents.
Mhm.
And I think any good trauma treatment, which we can all benefit from, worth any treatment worth its salt, has this kind of acceptance with change. So how do you get that, like, yeah, I'm under stress, maybe I'm not showing up in the best possible way. Let me acknowledge and accept that.
Yeah.
And let me not stay stuck there. Let me say, I would like to also think about what else I can do. And I start by saying that to my kids, even a baby. How do I like hold a baby and say, oh, mama is fried. And I have been like reading the news so much. And that is maybe sucking me away from you. And like, what would I like to do?
Mhm.
Um, so I just wanted to put out there that we've started with the A, and the B really being to breathe, right? And we think about our capacity to regulate, and the B stands for breathing and bodies, where again, if we go to that idea about danger, your body, in response to danger, it mobilizes,
Mhm.
right? Whether it's going to run, fight, or just actually, tune you out, it's your body taking over in order to keep you alive and safe. And so being able to breathe and be present, and also honestly being able to move. And I kind of joke with people because I have like a dirty little secret as a trauma therapist, which is that I'm not actually a big fan of yoga, but I love dance, right? And so I think when we think about movement, I think what's also important is honoring diversity and thinking about
Yes.
what brings you joy in movement. Like, so if you hate running, don't run. I'm just saying, like,
I
but
agree.
because it's always funny because people are like, you must do these things. Like I was like, you must do yoga because it's really good for you. And I tried it, and I was like, then I recently tried Bollywood dancing, and like that was my thing, right? And so I encourage you as a, as an adult to really find your thing and to help your kids find their thing. And for me, if it connects, so I'm half East Indian. And I feel very connected when I do Bollywood, even though my family doesn't do Bollywood, so it's really kind of funny. But I feel like when you do something that links back to your cultural heritage, it's almost like you're calling on the strengths of your ancestors and your people. And there's a whole way of like claiming that and regulating that I feel makes it super powerful. So I just wanted to say for parents, really,
Yeah.
again, honoring your cultural strengths and the things that your people did and do in order to regulate. And if that gives you joy, so and that's the if, then do more of that and bring those to your kids. That would be critical. And just to finish up, the C was the
Yeah.
connection piece, that idea of really understanding how, even for me, like, here we are and we're not moving. And so that will result in all sorts of feelings in my body, or my heart might be racing, or my stomach might be queasy. And that I would understand that that's because of the experience that I'm having, or
Mhm.
I feel stuck. And so what can I do?
Okay.
Yeah,
So I want to kind of review to make sure we
yeah,
all
yeah.
paid
Yeah.
attention. A, acknowledge that, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is real stuff. It's real
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And accept that we're here now. We can do what we can do. There are pieces that we can't achieve yet, but we're going to do what we can do today.
Mm-hmm.
And I would add, and for parents, and I'm here in that,
Mm-hmm.
offering my presence. Is that okay that I added
Oh, of course.
that? And then
Yeah.
the B, the breathe and the body, and connecting to your body. And you
Mm-hmm.
spoke about managing danger with body movement regulation and finding what fits for you. Thank you. We don't have to do yoga. If you love yoga, we're not upset with you, but also
No.
understanding that that might not be everybody's thing, and that's
Mhm.
wonderful. And you may have children with different kind of body regulatory strategies, so balancing that as parents is going to be something worth doing, and then they can learn how to do that themselves. And then the connect, around connecting the experience to the body awareness, and that can sort of bring organization. Is that a fair statement?
Mhm.
Okay, to the experience for the child. I love that. I want to, before we come to the end of our time together, I really want to talk about issues of diversity and how different families culturally experience events such as this. How and we understand culture is family culture as influenced by. You spoke about your East Indian heritage as experienced by being monolingual or multilingual, which you are. Hats off to you. Um, and how we can learn to really support and build on diversity versus um, respond to it with fear. I think sometimes diversity scares us because we don't understand, in my experience, and then our stress response kicks in because, oh, I don't know all about people from that area. And I'm hoping we can begin to be more accepting, but I wanted to hear your words about this.
Wow, that's so interesting. So I'm just going to be so I'm half Japanese, half East Indian, and I speak Spanish. And so growing up, I think diversity wasn't a flavor. It was just, there aren't that many people like me. And I think, and actually when you really start from that point, what you realize is that could be said of almost anyone, right? And I think that there's that starting point, and then there's also the starting point of, I have my privileges. We think about, what are the places where I have privilege, and then what are the places where I don't. So Ken Hardy talks about your privileged self and your subjugated self, right?
Yes.
And I think that those are critical aspects that we can apply to what's happening right now. So I think about the incredible privileges that I have in having outdoor space. And I also think I want to go back to that idea of proximity to danger. Right? Because I think about, for wherever we sit, through a diversity lens, we want to think about, I have a different experience of proximity to danger that is affected by the amount of money that I earn, my education, and by my race, as well as by the city that I'm in. And what we're seeing is that groups that were vulnerable, and I'm thinking about groups that have traditionally had higher levels of health concerns, in part because they've had higher levels of historical trauma, and actually because there have been tremendous inequities in our healthcare systems. They are closer to danger, and in particular, Black families, Native American families, right now Latino families, they're closer to danger. They're closer to danger because their jobs put them at risk, because they are the frontline workers. They are the backbone of what keeps us alive, and they are people of color largely. And so they're closer to danger, and they're also closer to danger because historically they've had higher levels of asthma because of where they live, because of higher stress levels, which are not of their own making, they're of historical making. When we really think, and the more that we learn, the more we think about how, historically, they've carried the burden for all of the horrors that our culture has done. I think about Native American families, their bodies, Black families' bodies have paid and show signs of stress. And now when a virus comes, who's vulnerable? Well, people who have been stressed by our society. And I mean, to the degree, I think also that we often see it matters how society responds to your cultural group. Because if society really steps up, then you feel safer. The question is society keeping everyone equally safe? Right? Because if you go back to that idea of proximity to danger, right? Do we all have equal access to safety? And that's not what we're seeing in the news.
No. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of Black providers who are in the healthcare fields, whether they are nurses or doctors or people who are in the hospitals working daily, they have a higher rate, it seems, of being turned down for really good access to care, like for testing. And that, I just want to say how painful that is to see that, not just because it's painful in its own right, but because it tracks onto the historical legacy of our country of saying that certain people don't get the same attention and the same safety that everybody should get. And so it's a serious equity problem. And I think even if you're in your home and you're not directly on the front lines and in danger, but you're in one of those cultural groups, it would make sense that you have a greater level of felt sense of danger because your group has a greater felt sense of danger.
Correct.
And I just wanted to kind of, again, acknowledge that. And that's where you start off with. So when people are saying, why are you having so many reactions? Like, well, let us tell you why, right? Because we are also having more danger and less safety.
Yes. And that's the A in the ABCs.
That's right.
I have to say thank you. And as you're sharing this, which I'm seeing on the news and aware of personally as a woman of color in America, an African-American female. As you narrated, the risk for my community, regardless of my privileges and my also at-risk issues, subjugation self versus privileged self, I could feel that in my body. In this conversation where we're just on video and I'm safe in my home, I could feel that in my body. So here is, how the story of trauma, the legacy of historical trauma, the witnessing of inequity impacts us regardless of sort of our physical safety in these experiences. And I think that's just so very powerful for me to acknowledge my own felt response to your words, they're just words. And also for us to be very mindful of the fact that everyone is walking through this experience slightly differently from their cultural lens. And to be a patient and understanding about, not that anybody's wrong or right, just to realize that we are all experiencing the same trauma or the same COVID crisis danger from a unique perspective. Thank you so much.
Can I expand on one small thing?
Of course.
So I just wanted to take that triangle and to say, there's behavior, and then we're thinking about what the person's been through. Take it back generations and think about, like, as parents, our parents had behaviors, the way they raised us, and that was linked to their experience. And then just think about, as cultural groups, our cultural groups had experiences, and that affects the way they raise us. And I'm not just using kind of a lens of challenge. I'm also using a lens of strengths. So sometimes when you see it, you really see kind of the strengths and beauty of your people in terms of given what their experience was, kind of both the beauty and also some of the challenges in terms of when you are so close to danger, it affects the way that you respond to people. And it affects the way you respond to your children, and it affects kind of the way our bodies respond, right? And so I just wanted to say that the acknowledge piece and the connection piece is not just in the here and now. Because a lot of time, that was the sort of the piece of, like, if you think of this as a timeline, a lot of times what we really need to think about is going back in time. What have we been through in the past? And, like, even thinking about the culture of our whole country. How does our country's history really affect the way we respond to certain groups? And really, again, if we want to break a cycle, how would we do this differently?
There you go. Thank you so much. This has been so informative. And I do want to end with one additional piece, because you talked about sort of historical responses to things, and not just danger, but also how you move through what we would call resilience. And I kind of want to end on that note. I think this is also an opportunity to really build that muscle of resilience in ourselves and our children. And whatever you want to think or say about the idea of building resilience, and even the cultural elements in that, because I think there's a lot there too that you've already alluded to. So let's end with a little discussion about resilience.
Okay, so I'm taking a deep breath, because one thing that's kind of interesting is, as a trauma therapist, I think the word resilience is often misused because it implies a bounce back. And that people sometimes misuse it to suggest that a person is resilient or not, so that they can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That's what we talk about. And what I really want to think about is the idea of, and I just want to say that when I worked with different people, different groups, even thinking about the survivors from the fires, what they said to me is they said, I am so tired of being resilient. And so they felt it was a burden. And so, and I want to say, and they were very strong, and they had moments of tremendous capacity and strength. But it's important that it not be a burden or a thing where you feel like you must do this. Because actually acknowledging feelings and saying, I'm not doing so hot. And I'm feeling sad, and I'm feeling scared. That's actually part of what would go into making you strong and resilient, making you weather the storm, right? And so one of the words that I love is, in San Francisco, there's a group, and they had to come up with their name, and they called it trauma transformed. And the idea of transformation, right? Because resilience colloquially implies bounce back. True. And I think when you think about, we are in a moment of tremendous stress, and yet what do we want our children, or what do we want ourselves to take from this? And how do we want to transform this? And so some of it is we'll take away that things are hard, but we might think about, even within this, what we're learning is, what does our family do when things are hard?
Mm-hmm.
How do we
Mm-hmm.
come together? And that's kind of beautiful. And I think about, how do we find moments of joy?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and I want to say that one of your moments of joy may be a very bizarre moment of joy, where your child may be totally losing it, totally tantruming. And yet what you say to yourself is, I'm good with how I am. I'm good with the fact that my child is having a huge, like the volcano blew,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And in that moment, I responded in a way that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
And maybe that was similar to my upbringing, or maybe it was different.
Mm-hmm.
And that would actually be a moment of victory. And I think if we can say that, in a way, that's not bouncing back, that's moving forward. And that's moving forward in a way that you're proud. And we see people doing that in all different ways. We see people taking moments and, bringing back games and playing them with their
Yeah.
kids, making up stories with flashlights,
Mm-hmm.
camping in the backyard, doing fun things at bath time. And in our field, we call those things angel moments. Right? So we think about how, because people talk about how trauma lives in the body. And what we would say is, loving moments absolutely live in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And your kids are going to tell you, they're going to say, remember that time when things were really bad and we did this.
Yes. Yes.
And what you feel as a blip becomes this like gorgeous little memory. Like, you got really mad, and then, we apologized, and then we did this. And those are the moments that, like, our kids learn that even in bad times, our parents repair.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They come back. They hold us afterwards. We didn't lose love. And so what we basically learn is that we are lovable, and we are safe, and we are acceptable in the arms of our parents. And that, just think about, if you can plant that seed in your kid, even if the world changes,
Yeah.
that is going to be the seed that helps them to survive well.
I would like to, if I may, sort of put together this, if this works for you, in this final thought that here's an opportunity to build angel moments with your children, and with the people you love, whoever those be, your partners, your friends, your the loved ones in your life. And those angel moments become opportunities or seeds of strength in challenging times. Is that a fair?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
And I think one thing that I think the idea of acknowledging that things, I think sometimes we aim for perfection. Like, we're like, the whole time, the whole 100% should be angel moments. We're like, no. It's so I just didn't want people to misunderstand. That's not real, right?
Yeah, we have to be real.
But to help hold on to those little moments when you're doing it.
Yeah.
And to help each other see it, so if you're living with somebody, to say, I see what you did, right? Like, the way you cut the sandwich.
And I think that's true. It's about the balance, because we're always going to be, I talk about joy and pain. That's life. Life is a balance of joy and pain. It isn't all joy. It isn't all pain. And how do we celebrate both? How do we successfully balance those two elements and all the other elements? But we're going to have wonderful things happen to us and challenging things happen to us. And moving through all of that successfully is, for me, how you do life.
And what a beautiful lesson for kids.
Thank you so much. This has been a great opportunity for me to spend a little bit of quality time with you and learn, and I'm sure our audience learned as well. Any final thoughts in terms of how people find you, or, you have your website on the previous slide, or for the books? Anything else you want people to know?
No, so I do have the website, pitlerproductions.com. Check us out there. We have books, and we also have a lot of free resources. And just so you know, Pitler is the name of a character. And so he is the character whose house was always destroyed in all the disasters. And so when we needed to name our sort of our website, our company, our endeavor, we really thought a lot about him and his family. And in the latest COVID story, he's the family where they're struggling because they don't have enough food and they don't have enough employment. And what I want to say is that I know Piplo because in my work, I work with him and his family. And what I have seen is really, I think whether you call it resilience or strengths, I have seen that when grown-ups are able to really acknowledge and to help children to make meaning of what they're going through and to help them feel their feelings and yet not have them like really explode all over everybody. When you learn what to do when you feel sad, what to do, those are the people who create the world. And that's why we named our company Piplo.
Yeah.
And so if anybody out there is struggling, I just want you to know that we see you both in your hardships and in the incredible beauty.
Thank you so much. One thing I would add, see, we can't stop. One thing I would add is I think we would agree, the parents, you are our partners in this. As a therapist, I am not the change agent. I am here to support you to be the change agent. And I think this has been said in the discussion as well. And these books allow you to do that. It's wonderful if you can access a professional, and please do that if you have that resource. At the same time, you really are the greatest tool for your child to create
Absolutely.
change. All right. Thank you, everyone.